Thank you. Marshal de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let me begin by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth, for securing this important debate, and to the Backbench Committee for granting it. I also want to pay tribute and thank my right honourable friend, the member for Hayes and Harlington, for bringing a similar debate to this House 4 years ago. I pay tribute to his hard work as a champion for the rights of disabled people. I would also like to thank War on Welfare, I will refer to them now as WOW, campaigners, for their work over the past 6 years in making the voices of the disabled people heard in this House, along with other disabled people's organisations and campaigners. Over 100,000 people signed the WOW petition, which first brought this debate here. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have heard accounts today from honourable members from across the House. But I want to just mention just a few, particularly my honourable friend, the member for Bishop Auckland, who set out the devastating impact of cuts to social security, in particular the impact of the cut to the Motability Scheme, where many individuals and disabled people have lost that vital support, and also the impact of the movement from many recipients from disability living allowance to the personal independence payment. And my honourable friend from Aberavon, who shared personal and powerful testimonies of his constituents, but also highlighting the shocking statistics in relation to the number of cases at tribunal that were overturned for both employment and support allowance and personal independence payments. Madam Deputy Speaker, today we are not asking the government to reveal the truth about the effects of cuts on disabled people. We're asking them to own up to creating a social security system for disabled people described by the UN's report on extreme poverty as callous, punitive and mean-spirited. A social security system that the UN Committee on the Rights of Disabled People has labelled as responsible for a grave, systematic human rights violations. A system that the Council of Europe concluded does not conform with the European Social Charters to rights for social security. We are demanding that the government own up to the effects of over £40 billion of cuts to disabled people's social security since 2010, to imposing a sanctions regime on sick and disabled ESA claimants, to a cruel and callous assessment framework for both PIP and ESA, and to the human catastrophe that is universal credit. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the last 8 years, disabled people have been forced to bear the brunt of the Tory austerity programme. They have been consistently and disproportionately impacted by cuts to social care, legal aid, housing, education and social security, as well as cuts to the Independent Living Fund. The Centre for Welfare Reform has found that disabled people had been hit 9 times harder by austerity than the rest of the population. Disabled people have been punished by this government's austerity agenda. They have been punished by the abolition of the disability living allowance and the introduction of the personal independence payment in 2013. And we know that the policy intention for abolishing DLA was to reduce expenditure on disability benefits by 20%, a move that has left hundreds and thousands of people without the support that they need, such as my constituent who suffers from chronic kidney disease and has been HIV positive for over 30 years, who was given 0 points at his PIP assessment, despite being unable to undress, prepare food for himself, and despite being in receipt of DLA for over 20 years. Disabled people have been punished by the gutting of the employment and support allowance, by the introduction of the 12-month time-limited payments for those on the contributions-based element, the tightening up of the criteria, and by the devastating cut to the ESA work-related activity component worth £30 per week, introduced in 2017 and which has hit over 50,000 people this year. And disabled people have been punished by an inaccurate and callous assessment framework which denies them dignity and respect. An assessment framework which has forced over 250,000 disabled people to take the DWP to tribunal to get the vital social security that they are entitled to, and where over 70% of PIP decisions brought to appeal tribunal are overturned. Since 2010, disabled people have been punished by the pointlessly cruel sanctions regime, which has hit more than 1 million disabled people in the past 8 years, and which the Welfare Reform Act ensured was more severe, more punitive and more long-lasting than ever before, resulting in disabled people facing severe debt and taking out loans because they have missed appointments at the job centre or because they didn't complete enough job applications. Figures released by the DWP last month show that 10% of ESA sanctions has lasted longer than 26 weeks, meaning sick and disabled people are losing 6 months' worth of their income. Madam Deputy Speaker, most importantly, disabled people face the government's flagship universal credit system, which acts as little more than a vehicle for cuts. Today's Work and Pensions Select Committee report has confirmed the devastating truth of the impact of universal credit on disabled people, of the structural problems inherent in universal credit, such as the 5-week wait and the online claim system that is inaccessible to many. Yes. Under universal credit, just 1 in 3 disabled people receive payments on time and in full, the rest having to wait weeks on end before receiving payment. Severely disabled people moving on to universal credit now are losing vital social security support that they need, in the form of the disability premiums, including the severe disability premium that they would have had under the legacy social security system, worth £64 per week. Payments which severely disabled people relied upon to cover those extra costs, such as ready-made meals or for help with household tasks. For one severely disabled person, universal credit meant that they received no money for 6 weeks, on top of losing their severe disability premium. The delays in payments and losing the premium meant that they were forced to go to their local authority for help, who gave them food vouchers so that they could actually have something to eat. In their words, they felt embarrassed and degraded by a system that left them destitute. It took a year for their universal credits to be sorted out, with endless calls which, I quote, were too physically and mentally painful for them to make. The government has made grave errors in cutting those disability premiums for those who are most in need. The transitional protection that this government were forced to give as a result of a High Court ruling earlier this year do not apply to new applicants or those who are naturally migrated on to universal credit, whose conditions remain the same, but who will lose that vital support. So I ask the Minister today, will she commit to ensuring that no severely disabled person who moves on to universal credit will lose their premiums? Madam Deputy Speaker, in the words of a WOW petition campaigner, in the past 8 years, this government has created a hostile environment for sick and disabled people and has turned their lives into a living hell. It has created this hostile environment in the form of a punitive social security system that is stacked against them, and a system that is riddled with errors. Errors such as the underpayments of ESA to almost 200,000 claimants by this government. Disabled people have had to rely on the High Court to right the terrible wrongs in the social security system. In the past year alone, the High Court has found that the government unlawfully discriminated against hundreds and thousands of PIP claimants, and it unlawfully discriminated against severely disabled people with the loss of premiums. Madam Deputy Speaker, members on the opposite benches do continue to bury their heads in the sand at the suffering that they have caused over the past month. We've heard ministers, including the former Secretary of State, label cuts to disabled people as fake news, the issues surrounding universal credit as teething problems. They dismiss the findings of the UN investigation as politically motivated, and they dismiss calls to conduct a cumulative impact assessment, which would offer a definitive analysis of the human costs of 8 years of austerity on disabled people. The UN Committee on the Rights of Disabled People and the Social Security Advisory Committee has joined this call to have this done. We know that the Equalities and Human Rights Commission has actually carried out this impact assessment, and it showed stark findings. We know the impact assessment can be done by the Treasury. If not, the Institute for Fiscal Studies can carry out this independent assessment. Madam Deputy Speaker, how many more disabled people have to suffer under this government's austerity programme? How many reports will the government link to the government's policies for mental health and suicides will they ignore? That the government refutes the findings of the UN on the effects of austerity on disabled people is shameful. But that it refuses to conduct an impact assessment of the human impact of their own policies is a downright denial.
Minister Sarah Newton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd very much like to add my voice to those congratulating the Honourable Lady for securing such an important debate. And I think it goes to the great credit of this House that after what has been quite an emotional and long and tiring few weeks in this House, that members from every country of Great Britain are here tonight to speak up for their constituents so passionately and so well. And I think that is a great credit to this House. It's probably our last debate, our last full debate before the adjournment debate tomorrow, and it's right that we focused on such an important issue as disabled people in our country, the amazing contribution that they make, and of course, for those that are very vulnerable and need our support, we quite rightly should be focusing all our efforts to see what more we can do. And I'm sure people across this House all want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure we live up to the ideals of the UN Conventions, of which we help design, the Disability Discrimination Act that a Conservative Prime Minister introduced into this House, the cross-party support for the Equalities Act, which underpins so much of what we're doing. These are important issues which should unite the House. And I'm pleased to hear a lot of really constructive comments this evening. But I really want to focus my remarks, because I've got so little time, I will not be able to answer all the questions, but I will write to honourable members if I haven't been able to address their concerns. But I really want to focus my few words that I've got on the motion, because it's such an important motion. And I want to reassure members that the government does publish distributional analysis of the cumulative impact of government decision on household finances at every fiscal event. Now, the last publication was in October to accompany the autumn budget and assess the tax, welfare and public spending changes announced from the autumn statement 2016 onwards that carry a direct quantifiable impact on households. The Treasury uses its intra-governmental tax and benefit micro-simulation model to produce this analysis, and the underlying data used for this model is from the Office of National Statistics Annual Living Cost and Food Survey. Now, HMT use this survey because it is the primary source of data about what income people have, how they spend their money, and what public services they have accessed. The LCF is unique in capturing all this information. Only by assessing the impact of government policy on each of these areas can an accurate and fully comprehensive assessment of total impact of all government policies on welfare, taxes and spending on public services be accurately assessed. To only look at one aspect, such as changes to income from benefits, does not provide a complete picture and is misleading. For example, this government has committed to increase spending on the NHS by £20 billion, which will have a positive and direct impact on the lives of millions of disabled people. And to only look at benefits would be really misleading. Now, the Living Cost and Food Survey came into existence in 2007, but a household food consumption and expenditure survey has been run by government since the 1940s. The primary purpose of these surveys has always been to collect detailed expenditure data for a sample of people, which is then used to assess changes in people's spending patterns, to adjust the basket of goods used to estimate inflation. The survey does not collect information from the sample of individuals that allows us to assess whether a person is disabled or not, and it's never been able to do that. As with all government surveys, taking part is voluntary, and a difficult balance has to be struck between the amount of information we are asking respondents to provide, and therefore the time that it takes to completing the survey, and the proportion of the sample willing to take part. Now, the survey sample is designed to be representative of the population, and the more people who do not respond, the more the estimates from the survey potentially suffer in terms of quality. So the lack of information about disability means that the information does not exist for the Treasury to estimate the cumulative impact of all government policies on disabled people. However, the Office for National Statistics are currently undertaking developments to their household surveys to integrate various surveys and also to link various sources of administrative data held by the government. That means it might be possible to have the required information on disability status in the future. They're consulting with users, and I've instructed my officials to raise the issue of disability status for the Living Cost and Food Survey, and would encourage all the members who care about this as much as I do and stakeholders to contact the ONS, because they are independent, and raise this issue with them. Because if we did have that information, and if they did proceed in the way that I've just described, linking data sets, it would be possible for us to undertake the sort of assessments that people have well articulated this evening. But although a cumulative impact assessment is not possible now, the DWP does undertake a wide range of other research and analysis to assess and monitor the impacts of policies on disabled people. DWP runs its own household survey called the Family Resources Survey. This collects information from a sample of households with detailed information on sources of income, the amount of income families receive, and also detailed information about the characteristics of people in those households. This survey, I have said that in order to answer the questions, I won't take interventions, but I will go back and write to any that I haven't been able to answer. This survey does collect the information required to make an assessment of the disability status of people in a household. And this information is then used to provide estimates of the amount of income that families with disabled people in them have. And the DWP publishes estimates of the numbers and percentages of people within households with disabled people who have low incomes in the annual Households Below Average Income publication. Now, in the 2016-17 survey, we saw that 16% of people in families where there was a disabled person in the category described as absolute low-income poverty before housing costs, with a weekly income after tax of £280 or less for a couple with no children, compared to 19% in 2009 and 10. So absolute low-income poverty on a before housing cost basis for families with a disabled person has actually improved by 3 percentage points since 2010. And looking at, can I just finish the point? And looking at all 4 measures of low-income poverty before and after housing costs, on a relative and an absolute basis, poverty for people in families with a disabled person has improved since 2010 for 3 out of the 4 measures, and there was no change in the 4th. Now, I am not complacent. 1 person living in poverty in this country is 1 too many, and that's why we were absolutely determined to do everything we can to put more money into people's pockets. But as well as this publication of poverty figures, let me make the points, because I've been asked to address a lot of issues here, and I really want to do that. Now, as well as the publication of the poverty figures, the Department for Work and Pensions publishes impact assessments for every new policy that carefully considers the potential impacts of these policies on those with protected characteristics, in line with its legal obligations and its strong commitment to promoting fairness. The DWP has a continual and broad programme of research and evaluation of policies affecting disabled people, often contracted to independent research bodies, and all the findings are published. A recent example of this kind of work was research into the experience of PIP claimants, which was published in September and provided valuable insights into how PIP was working to inform policy development. And I must say we've had some appalling misuse of statistics tonight, because of all people who've applied for PIP, 9% have gone to appeal and 4% have been overturned. Now, I work with a great deal of colleagues in this House, with the select committees, with the APPGs, with disabled people and those people representing disabled people. And when we hear recommendations for how we can improve that process, we implement them. The Select Committee did an extremely valuable piece of work looking at assessments for ESA and PIP, and we are delivering on implementing those recommendations. And one of the members of the committee tonight raised the point about the video recording of PIP assessments, something I'm absolutely determined to see, because I think it will restore a lot more confidence in the process. We spent the summer carefully speaking to people with disabilities, and let's not forget that it is fully qualified healthcare professionals that undertake these assessments. We spoke to them about these assessments and them being video recorded. Putting all of that information together, we started the live testing of PIP assessments only a few weeks ago. We'll have that work completed in the new year, and we will be able to report back to the Select Committee and to the House on the progress that we're going to make and how we're going to roll that out. Now, we're also undertaking a huge, large-scale test. It's actually the largest randomised control trial of its kind in the Western world, as well as research into the employment and sport package, to look at all the things that work to enable people with disabilities who want to work into work, because we know that there are many people with disabilities, and it was really interesting to listen to the personal experiences of the member for Eastbourne. There are many disabled people who want to work but face unacceptable barriers to work. And although we've made a lot of progress, the latest data from ONS shows that 900,000 more people are in work over the last 5 years. That is a steady increase in the employment rate from 43% to 51%. But we're very ambitious, and I want to see that gap close completely so that employers can draw on all the talents of the nation. And we have set ourselves the goal of 1 million more disabled people into work, and we are making good progress on that. Now, of course, not only are we helping those people who can work into work, but we're always looking at what more we can do to improve our main health and disability-related benefits. But let's be absolutely clear, we are spending record sums of money on these benefits. It's over £50 billion this year. It's much larger than our defence budget, and it's grown by more than £5.4 billion since 2010, and in every single year of this Parliament it is forecasted to rise. And all of those benefits that are about the additional costs of disability were not frozen. They were not part of the benefits cap, and including payments for carers. And so it is simply not true when people have said this evening that we've been reducing the amount of money that we spend on the social security system. I will.
For giving way. Professor Alston produced a punchy report, it's true, but it did make some very telling points. He referred to, and I quote, the dramatic decline in the fortunes of the least well-off in this country, but he added that the government has remained determinedly in a state of denial. It does sound from what she's saying as though she's confirming Professor Alston's point. Has there not been a dramatic decline in the fortunes of the least well-off?
You know, I was very pleased when the Honourable Lady opened this debate by saying she is an evidence-based policymaker. I am an evidence-based policymaker. I spent time on the Science and Technology Select Committee and was instrumental in having social science brought into the purview of that. I was on the board of the Parliamentary Office in Science and Technology. It's very, very important to me to make sure that we do use statistics and we use data and we use research accurately. What I am quoting from is independent, impartial information. Now, but as I said, one person in poverty is one too many. But let's not forget that we've had to deal with the legacy we were left by the last government. Oh, there is no money, and we've had to make very difficult choices about public expenditure, and we made sure that we increased the amount of money for people with disabilities, and we increased money for the NHS. NHS. The NHS and that extra money going into the NHS is directly benefiting people with health conditions and disability. So I have very little time to wind up, but what I want to say is that we've also talked about other barriers that people face to fulfilling their aspiration to play a full part in our society, and I completely agree with that. Employment is really important, but just as all of us this evening are going to go back to our constituencies, we're going to do some Christmas shopping, we're going to go to carol services, we're going to enjoy a panto, we're going to do things with our family. So many disabled people in our country will not be able to do that. So we are absolutely determined, through the work that we do with our sector champions, through the work that we do on our interministerial working groups, to make sure that every disabled person in our society can play their full part, and we'll remove those barriers, and we're absolutely committed to living up to the UN, all the UN standards which we've signed up to, absolutely certain to make those positive differences and changes.
Debbie Abrams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank again the Backbench Business Committee, all the contributors. You've been absolutely fantastic, highlighting what's happening in your constituencies up and down the country. But can I also thank the thousands of people that have been in contact with me over the last months and more recently this last few days. The DPOs, wow, DPAC and Inclusion, and many charities as well with their briefings, including the Centre for Welfare Reform, who said that this cumulative impact assessment is possible, and given that the Treasury accepts the EHRC's cumulative impact assessment modelling, it does seem rather bizarre that this Minister is saying that it can't happen. I'm conscious that if I don't finish before 9:36, we can't have a vote on this, Madam Deputy Speaker. So once again, can we all remember the stories that have been we have discussed this evening as we leave to go on our Christmas breaks? Thank you.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order papers, many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Thanks, everyone.